Hello to everybody. I'm speaking here from my home office and that is already the first description of the situation again, since our universities are closed, and of course, since we are all preparing for the Christmas time. So, but I'm really happy to have the chance to attend this event, and congratulations for the founding of the Institute of Urban Designers in Sri Lanka. A very good movement. And thank you especially to the moderator. I really feel honored, and it was perfectly, let's say, condensed how you have presented my thoughts on what has happened in terms of urban planning and design, and what was the effect of the COVID pandemic. Since what I could do was really describe what has happened. And now we will see in the next year how these three questions, and I think you really have kind of extracted the right questions out of my talk. So we will see it in the next year. My first impression, before we come to the larger discussion later this afternoon, my first impression is for a lot of topics. So the COVID crisis has been a kind of amplifier. It has amplified questions and conflicts we already had. And now the question is whether this amplification of the old conflicts, if you have said it, is it new urbanism, is it a drawback or whatever? So will the experience we made with the crisis, will these experiences help us to answer the questions we already had before the crisis, but now the need to answer it is more urgent? And that's something that will bring us to very tough discussions. And let me just make one point in order not to exceed the 5 minutes. So regarding the distribution of space on our streets, which is basically given to private-owned cars. My impression is, and that's what I try to explain in my talk, the ghost is somehow out of the bottle. We have seen that it is possible to organize the streetscape and the zoning and the distribution of space to the different functions in a different way. And now, for the first time, we see it is possible to do it in a different way. It is not just as we as urban designers always try to explain and how we did it in our drawings and in our nice images. No, we could see that it is possible. And people have learned that it is possible to go to work as well by bike. So different to the situation before, we have a kind of small proof, a practical proof that a different way of urban design is possible, not just in our books and drawings. And this is something I think it is open how this will lead to finally to solutions if you have addressed them in your questions. But what I think is that the level of discussion and the level of negotiation, because urban design and planning is all about negotiating space. So this level is somehow, it has leveled up, and for specific topics, it will be easier to discuss for and to come to more sustainable solutions. Last point, the issue of digital tools, that we can use digital tools in order to do our work in our home office and so on, will heavily affect transport planning. Since until now, we always have calculated the number of workplaces in a specific area and the number of living places in another area. And then out of these numbers, we calculated the number of commuters and traffic that will happen. And according to this, we tried to design our streets and as well the widths and the lanes needed for cars. This will be different since we cannot any longer predict, or this simple calculation of prediction will be, or this of provision of space will be substituted by a more complex thinking. For instance, if the street is narrow, can I decide to stay at home to do my work there instead of asking to enlarge the street in order that I have the possibility to go to my workplace? So there's a second option now existing. And we have all learned, as we do it here in this conference, to live with the second options. And this will, of course, in the longer perspective, change the way how we design and structure our cities. Thank you so much.
Shobha.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Frank. Let me introduce our second speaker, architect Professor Gaurav Raja, Professor of Architecture, a design researcher, and well-known expert on universal design, accessibility, and social inclusion from Indian Institute of Technology. He is a key consultant for developing the guidelines for accessibility in Indian railways and for urban environments. He serves on various national advisory committees of the Ministry of Social Justice and Development and Environment and the Ministry of Urban Development, Government of India. Mafis's Universal Design Award in 2010 by the National Center for Promotion of Employment of the Disabled People. He has won that award. Professor Jaurav's topic is Urban Futures for Social Inclusion and Universal Design Approach. Topic moderator is architect D.B. Navaratna. He has earned his Master of Urban Design, University of Hong Kong, Master in Architecture from University of Moratuwa, Sri Lanka, Built Environment from University of Moratuwa, Sri Lanka, and he's a former director, Conservation, Cultural Bank Sri Lanka. He's a former ICOMAS member, Sri Lanka. Also, he's a practicing architect, senior lecturer, and examiner.
Thank you very much. I think that you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Thank you for that introduction, Shobha. And good afternoon, everybody. And I will say my duty is to summarize Professor Gaurav Raj's speech or presentation. And I must tell you that it's a gigantic task because he had so much of things to say within 1 and 11 minutes. And there was so much content in it, and it made my task very serious and very difficult. However, I would like to share some of his slides while briefing it. I think you all could see the slides which Professor Gaurav produced, and I'm going to use them to do the summary. This is him. The first thing that he was looking at is future as a paradigm of change. Urban futures can be anticipated to be increasingly complex with enhanced technologies and increased human vulnerabilities. At the same time, better quality of life, well-being, and safety remain key goals of urban futures. The question is how to make them inclusive, human-centric, accessible to all, resilient, and easy to live in. And that's the task that he sets out for himself. Then he looks at this complex relationship of human, space, and time. And I like the way that he looks at from there onwards into the issue of urban population. Better quality of life, well-being, and safety is his target. And human, space, and time interrelationship is looking at from a context where urban population is 68%, or rather two-thirds of the population uh, in urban context in 2050. This is the situation that we are facing. Then interconnected of this human space and time relationship is a task that we have to look at. Then he looks at UN, how United Nations is looking at this, and UN is trying to include everyone and trying to answer. And sustainable goals of 17 goals are to be achieved. But I think I would like to ask him at the end, because I think these 17 goals, as he rightly says, the certain economic and certain financial abilities are there. It's very hard to achieve. So then he is questioning, is everyone included in this 17? Which is a rightful question in our context, which Sri Lanka and India is in, which I love his division of what he's talking about, global north and global south due to stress factors. So I will come to that. And then the future of urban living, I think it's nicely taken up from the point of relationship of human, space, and time. And he's saying anytime, anywhere, anyone. And it's a nice way of putting it together. And that is the question that we are going to look at. Then aging is another issue that he looks at. And due to that, certain mental disorders, cardiovascular diseases will be there in the world that he tells. 2 billion people by 2050 will be 60 or older. And in our world, 80% of that will be in the middle income countries and including ours. So the problem is falling in our lap. That's what he's trying to say. So the mental health is something getting deteriorated, and cardiovascular diseases are going to be an issue. So what is his answer? He doesn't stop there. The professor talks about the universal design thinking, which came in late 1980s and 90s. And he's trying to see this universal thinking, how one could use it to answer these urban issues. And those 7 principles, one by one, he looks at. And before that, he look at these 2 pyramids, the universal design pyramids, and he see that everybody is not equal, everybody is not able. Then how do you match or find the link between these 2 pyramids and the connectivities? So, definition of universal design. The definition of universal design that he said, the design produce the environment to be for all the people, great extent possible without a need for adoption and specialized design. So that is what he is trying to show us, and then taking us how urban designer or urban answer or a planning answer could bring these principles into work. And we have another issue to look at. Then one side environment, then humans. Humans have adaptability, and the environment has this accessibility. And you need to assist and assistance in between these two. Then equitable users. The equitable users is the number one, the first of the seven that we say that he is bringing our notice into. Equity in, say, the design is useful and marketable to people with diverse abilities. Then it becomes equitable. Equity in urban planning, equity in access to urban services, equity in housing, neighborhood, equity in mobility systems, equity in gender inclusions, equity in public space. So those are the factors that he looked at. And this is a fantastic picture which shows how in Mumbai this exists. What is the equity that we are talking of? Then flexibility in use. Flexibility in use is the next parameter, or rather how he is going to address this issue. The design accommodates a wide range of individual preferences and abilities. Flexibility at urban scale, flexibility street space, flexibility homes, 21st century, flexibility in homes is required because we just experienced it. I'm in my room and turn into an office. Flexible workspaces, flexible open spaces, flexibility through technologies, of course, time flexibility. And then he goes on to say the flexibility, how sometimes the office time has eaten into our driving time or commuting time. Now, the next is, this is a good example of how flexible the open sort of a building being used for treatment. Simple and intuitive use, the third one. Urban information systems, urban health services, urban mobility services, urban emergencies, and urban crowd management. So use of the design is easy to understand regardless of the user's experience, knowledge, language skill, or current concentration levels. So that brings in inclusivity, as you will see in this definition. There's no barrier of knowledge, language, skills, or current in using the total urban system. Yes, how Myanmar has used it is one of the examples that he's using, and how they have made the social distancing, which is the need of the time. Then perceptible information. The design communicates necessary information effectively to the user, regardless of ambient condition or the user sensory ability. Then perceptible streets, neighborhoods, public open spaces, mobility system, urban environments. So all those things, focus areas that he is bringing in. I think in the discussion, we might be able to add certain things into this as well. And that is what I think he expects also. These are the focus areas that he is putting forward for our discussion.
Sorry to
Then,
you have
sorry?
5 more minutes.
Sorry?
We have another 5 more minutes, sir.
Okay, yes. So then the next one, that is tolerance for error. The tolerance for error. The design minimizes hazards and adverse consequences of accidental, unintended actions. So tolerance of error is an important point here. Urban infrastructure, resilient information system, transportation system, and public space are the focus areas. Share of death from unsafe sanitation. Of course, you will see where it is happening in this map very clearly. And this is a good example of where a festival, the space that is dedicated for festival, how it was turned out during the COVID time and what has happened to that. And same in European context, or sorry, Israel. Low physical effort is needed because you are aging and it's another factor: physical activity, digital fatigue, urban stress, open space, and active aging. The design can be used efficiently and comfortably and with a minimum fatigue. So that is another target, and that is what the good two examples of India, how you kept social distancing during this pandemic time. Size and space for approach and use. Appropriate size and space is provided for approach, reach, manipulation, and use regardless of user body size, posture, or mobility. Urban open spaces, balconies, and terraces in high density living, spaces with digital services, core for informality are the focus areas. So what do you do with these ones? Of course, what he proposed is this average space that is given to push the boundaries. It might be difficult, but that is what he proposes. And this is a very, very interesting diagram, I would say, where you look at the socio-cultural context, age, ability, gender, and economy as 4 focal points. And this is what you make. And this is another very important thing for us to discuss today, is how do you determine this range of fit within cultural factors, psychological factors, physiological factors, and psychosocial factors, and how do you look at this range of fit? The Vinit model is being used to show us how to catch the target population. Out of this newer definition of universal design he comes out with, the process, the important point here is the process, enable the empower the diverse population by improving human performance, health, wellness, and social participation. So that is what he's saying at the end. Cities have capabilities of providing something for everybody, only because and only when they are created by everybody. So that is Jane Jacobs' note that he ends this thing up, but in his conclusion, he takes 10 points. I think urban inequality and access, urban mobility and last mile connectivity, technological features, etc. But to conclude this and start with a question, I'm taking 2 points, Professor, here, your first and the last points. First point, urban inequality and access to basic. And 10th point is urban politics and governance systems. And these, to me, are highly interconnected in our part of the world. Unless this is resolved for urban to resolve to or focus to get urban inequality out of our systems, how would our urban contexts be? Because however we try, whatever the design methodology we use, these 2 factors will change our designs. So I will stop at that and I will wait for professors respond on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Navratne, for a very elaborate summarization of a pretty long talk that I unfortunately ended up with because I could not plan too much to squeeze in 30 minutes. And also I must thank Professor Janaka for being very kind to invite me for this session, which I believe is actually a collective reflection and something that we are all going to learn from each other than just make this a kind of a one-sided monologue. So as already Professor Frank has already mentioned a couple of things, a small layer of perspective that as I've added here is bringing the dimension of Global South. As we already know that many a times we dream about us being like, why can't our cities also reflect, I would say, a European experience in terms of certain parameters, at least in terms of being pollution free, being people centric, having more pedestrian spaces. So those remain the aspirations of the Global South. But unfortunately, know, because I know these discussions might remain very elitist, because none of those sectors is able to come to maybe a virtual event like this. Rather, therefore, we have to go to them to really understand what fuels urban inequity. And as you rightly said again, how politics shapes up. This is my experience of, I would say, past 20 years of working in these sectors, that how we have avoided the academic pedagogy by insulating it from learning about the urban politics. Whereas it is the urban politics which controls the regulations of how the inequity is accommodated into the urban density programs. Let me cite an example here, and two very pertinent examples I will give you. One, I bring it is from the cultural dimension, and which is why I lay so much importance on the role of cultural phenomena. As they say, a very famous quote by Peter Drucker, who said, culture eats strategy for breakfast every morning, right? So no matter what strategies we came up with as urban design, I know inequity leads to a complete vandalism, a completely unsimulated experience of the same street. I know today we have simulation softwares to even do agent-based modeling of check pedestrian behaviors, etc. But we still do not have enough knowledge on why and with the extent of inequity we have, what behavioral changes it brings into the public realm. And since we do not account for that, what we realize is that our urban design solutions therefore begin to be called as theoretical and do not match the practice. Because in practice, what you find is it is the politics of space, it is the politics of water and sanitation, it is the politics of urban pollution, it is the politics of street vending, it is the politics of space. And that's precisely to be seen that while I've shown you some images of what happened when the COVID came and the lockdown happened, but you can very well see now in India, while COVID is pretty well there, but the streets are absolutely flooded with people the way it used to be, with only one layer of mask added to it. Social distancing is not a practical concept which is not happening on the ground, not because people do not want to do it, but the public realm doesn't support it. And not everyone has the equitability of the resources to work from home. And that is unfortunately the majority of the side. That's one side of the story. The second side of the story, for example, is, and what my argument here is, that unless the urban politics really accepts this as a human issue, it should start capping also that you cannot densify a billion people in 100 square kilometers. And unless urban densities are regulated by rationality, even if we have the best of futuristic designs, we have to have rationality. You cannot put 7 billion people of the globe in one city in the name of urbanization. And that's a very serious concern that I have, because that leads to, I would say, a resource crunch in urban sharing. And that is when even a small disaster that strikes, everybody starts getting affected by it. And which is why all I'm trying to say is that while I'm pursuing universal design in a everyday life of my own experiences, so I'm just trying to say it's a simple philosophy that it gives, but all it requires is that we need to have minimizing the distances between governance and people, between design and people, and between resources and people, so that it only becomes a people-centric approach, which it is not even now. I'm sadly saying this, that even post, I would say, post-COVID still looks like a dream, but even during the COVID situation, I am seeing it is the capitalistic dreams which are taking over, not the people-centric, because the shifting of the digital economy is taking the economy into invisible hands. It is still not a model where society benefits. It's actually a model where capitalism drives the urban cultures. And unfortunately, I would say it further that I argue on this because it has raised the ideas of consumerism. Digitization has not minimized consumerism, it has increased consumerism when everything becomes too accessible to you. But it has also added a certain kind of divide because we still have enough populations who cannot afford digital equipments, digital instruments, and digital this thing. But on the other side, yes, if it is used positively, it can actually give us data which can actually be used to check on vulnerabilities and can enhance our planning procedures in order to reduce inequity. I think my time is almost up, but I would add one last example of the cultural paradigm here is, in our homes. Let's take an example of a city like New Delhi. Every home almost is supported by some housemaid or house servant. And that housemaid or servant is a service provider to that living environment. And when COVID happened, this was a major crisis of everyday life. Unlike Germany or unlike Europe, where the technology has already been in use at homes and the work cultures are divided between the family structures, the challenge here is that we got a big scare that now how do we allow our service providers to enter our homes who might actually carry greater risk of COVID. And as a consequence, that work fell onto the householders, which started creating further problems because now during the work time, how do you manage the home affairs? And those kind of crises, I would say, and many more have led to a huge amount of mental anxiety, including, I would say, an invisible population, and I completely speak for them, and that is children. We cannot talk about sustainability without bringing children on board. So my only humble, perspective to urban politics, to urban governance, and to urban inequity is that we must bring all those people on board. And believing in the fact that all humans can definitely come up with amazing solutions. And that is what I would say is democracy by design. So I hope, we can discuss this further in those shares, because the global South cannot resolve its problems if we continue the way we already are. Mere digitization and mere technologies will not change the scenarios much, except for increasing more anxiety and more inequity if we do not bring the policies into the right perspective. I think I will end it here. I don't know if I could completely answer it, but I think we all have to collectively find many answers. And as urban designers and planners, we also have to be on the streets with those people to really bring the grounded issues and bring it into a pedagogic realm. So I definitely take this onus that as academics, as researchers, we have to shift the ways we have been teaching and delivering pedagogies in the design studios, because we really have to take the studio to the ground than the reverse. And that's where I would like to conclude for now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Architect Navaratna. Thank you, Professor. Let me introduce our third speaker, Professor A. K. Soon. Professor Soon is a practice architect registered in Singapore and Malaysia. Professor at National University of Singapore. He was founder member of Singapore Planning and Urban Research Group. Professor Soon was president of the Singapore Institute of Architects from 1990 to 1993. He received the Gold Medal in 2010 for achievements in architecture and profession. Singapore Design Gold Jubilee Award in 2015. For the Singapore Design Council, Professor soon was awarded the International Passive Low Energy Architecture Prize for his work in rural areas of Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam. Also, he is a fellow of the World Academy of Art and Science. Professor Soon's topic is Changes in Life and Cities, Tropical Countries. Topic moderator is architect Dr. Senagar Dharmathiratna. He has earned his PhD, School of Architecture, National University of Singapore, MSc in Architecture, University of Moratuwa, Sri Lanka, Postgraduate Diploma in International Affairs, Bandanayake Center for International Studies, Sri Lanka, Built Environment, University of Moratuwa, Sri Lanka. He is a practicing architect, senior lecturer, and examiner.
We saw the day. So let me start by looking at the first area that you are talking about. One thing is it starts by finding the right balance between the mechanized world and the natural world. And in doing so, he looks at nature being a humanizing agent on the environment, and he looks at industrial phase of history, exploiting natural resources, natural environments, etc. By finding a balance, he finds bliss with the optimum scale that would allow type of how to balance the mechanized world against the as well as the natural world. And he feels that it needs a change of mindset in that is liberated from industrial aesthetics. And in this manner, he calls for a evolution is too vast. And thus he says this must start with education in a comprehensive approach. So before we come to the hard and fast nuts and bolts of education, he has another point to make. One is about the hierarchies. The issue with hierarchy, he finds that it is these issues with hierarchy causes an effective divide between the top and the base. And he finds that the people have become more skeptic and critical of hierarchies. And also in this light, he finds a need to bridge the gap and enhance the bonding between the top and bottom, which he does, as you can see in the projects where he reaches out to the grassroots. I personally know his projects in Vietnam, Indonesia, etc., where he tries to ensure that these are not top to bottom approaches, but engages the grassroots itself. And in doing so, he in this greater quest, he finds that you need to redefine the people's aspirations. And taking Singapore as an example, we jokingly always say Singaporeans have 5 C's. One is cash, credit cards, the country club, car, and condominium. These are which are the criterions of looking at how successfully you are doing financially. But as opposed to these, he proposes 7 C's, where he looks at developing certain core values in the human being. First, how he sees how competence, which is built up in the human being, leads to confidence. Confidence leads to courage. Courage leads to curiosity. Curiosity leads to creativity. And to make a total human being with all 5 of these core values, that how compassion needs to come in as a magic ingredient, and as a magic ingredient. And once these 6 ingredients come into effect, he finds how collaboration is possible. Collaboration between professionals, collaboration between human beings, and the smarts entirely different. Look at the synchronization of. You can hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
Hello, am I breaking up?
No,
Yes, we can hear you.
You can hear you, right? Okay. So, very good. Thank you. Okay, so Professor Tay looks at the smart city in a different way, more revolutionary way than all of us do. Rather than looking at, he looks at it in terms of internal and external biases. We look at smart cities in terms of infrastructure systems which are synchronized. But he finds that systems are incentivized, and the incentives come from external or outside. But he believes in processes, where he says processes are based on motivation, which are generated internally. So where we are talking about motivations generated internally, he finds that creativity likewise comes from the inside and helps to transform the individual and the society. And this he finds in a physical matrix, how this transformation housing estates into a central nervous system. For those who are conversant with the Singapore planning systems, especially the DG or development plans, which are I'm as Professor Pace using the same sketch, whereas I have used the towns. Now we must understand Singapore works on a module where you from, and the precinct has a precinct center. The precinct, a couple of cluster of precincts lead to a neighborhood, and neighborhood. Couple of concentration of neighborhoods, about 5 or 6 neighborhoods, will subscribe to a town area, town center, right? So what I have marked here in red circles are the neighborhoods, and the neighborhood centers are marked in a red circle. And what I have marked in a purple circle is a town area, and the town center is marked in a purple circle as purple dot. Then what's it's the entire spatial circularized in a green circle. And what I have marked in the blue lines are the connections between the town centers and the town center and the neighborhood centers, as well as the interconnections between neighborhood centers. So this is the matrix he proposes, with whereas I have marked the prescribed by Professor Taken Soon, prescribes the town centers and the neighborhood centers to be connected by access routes that form a nervous system. These routes that form a nervous system are the blue lines, which I have marked, that connect the neighborhood centers in red dots and the town center in a purple dot. So, and he talks about the schools and classrooms to be placed along these nerves on top of retail commerce, office, and public social amenities. So these triangles or schools will be placed on top of the commercial office spaces as well as the public and social amenities. Then the general idea here is that the children could study upstairs and go downstairs to interact with the community and become street smart. So this idea is about making smart people to make a smart city. So what Professor Taken Soon concludes is, now the schools are, what he observes is that now the schools are in the periphery, which is away from the central nervous system. So this interaction for the time being is suspended. So he's proposing this spatial matrix that would create smart people and in turn smarter cities. And the 3D planning video that has been published by him it demarcates the contribution by the Singapore Institute of Architects towards the urban planning of Singapore in 5 DGP areas. And these are, of course, out of 55 development guide plan areas prepared by the URA, or Urban Redevelopment Authority, in 1990, as I said, as the renewable physical plans, which are related to 55 planning areas of Singapore. And the design approach is quite simple. It mainly outlines a stacking of all city functions together, one on top of the other, as noted below, where you have the vehicles at ground level, commercial and civic functions above this level. On top of this would come workplaces and cultural facilities. And on top of all these will be a urban landscape deck. And on top of the deck will be the schools and housing on top. So we find that it's a work, live, farm, play, learn, and heal environment for urban tropical living. Now this is a sketch.
පොඩ්ඩක් බැරි වුණා නේද ටික වෙලා චුට්ටක් දෙක සවිනාඩි දෙක තුන විතර මම මතක් කරන්න ඔයාලට මෙසේජ් එකක් එවන්න chat එකක් එවන්න
So this is a sketch also done in the same spirit. You can see it's a sectional perspective, and you see that how the energy of the designers, where it's a planning for an efficient mechanism, and it plans for an intelligent integrated organism, which is the urban space, right? And it's a living concept, and Professor Tae-Ken-soon says it's not a mechanical concept. So it plans for a city which is an intelligent integrated organism. And of course, these are the 3D renderings of the same concept. You can see the retail space below, as well as the urban landscape deck. On top of it, where you find the schools and the housing, right? And this image shows how this spatial concept is brought into a broader spatial matrix of a country, how different areas could be engaged in the same 3D planning. And this planning philosophy is brought in to plan the whole island, where the concept in one sector, it talks about concentrating 2 million people in the south for urban living. Then number 2, heartland living in the middle area with open green spaces. And of course, also it talks about resort living in the north for the average Singaporean on reclaimed land. Now what we will see here is the Changi Point reclaimed land resort living, brought in by another team working parallel to Professor Tae. It talks about a waterfront resort town for the average Singaporean. And then this is the Kampong Bugis plan, where Professor Tae, as well as another colleague of mine, Lee Chai Kiang, was participating in, led by Professor Tae-Ken-soon. The Kampong Bugis, as you saw in the video, it's a tropical city with greenery, high-level shading, low-level shading, wind tunneling, heritage conservation, as well as tropical towers. Also, it comprises multimedia corridor, food streets, recreation, public-private partnership elements that bring in public-private partnership. Then you see the integrated transportation system, the LRT, MRT systems, which are integrated through the buildings, the vertical greenery, high-level shading with the tree canopies, and to top it all, he concludes on this as that you need a free flow of ideas between people and the government to bring in a plan of this scale. And the objective, he concludes that the objective of this greater program is to recover the DNA of the people and the place as the challenge undertaken by this venture. I take my liberty of showing a last slide, which was not shown in the presentations, but this is as much as Professor Tae-Ken-soon says the objective, recovery of the DNA of the people and the place as the challenge by this vertical, this 3D planning. This is to show how the 3D planning has been in the DNA of Professor Tae-Ken-soon with one of the buildings that he did. And I'm happy to say I have been in this building, enjoyed this building, where he had, I think there were a couple of architects he was involved in with the DP architects. In his very young days, this building was done in the 70s in the spirit of the metabolism movement. You see, it's a stacking of different activities. The diagonal stacked housing, facing the beach road and the retail commercial podium, as well as the offices which are stacked there, show how the 3D planning is also in the DNA of Professor Teken Sun, as much as he strives to recover the DNA of the people and places by this challenge. So let me unshare this presentation to talk about the stop share.
We have another 5 more minutes.
Dr. Senaka,
I will now pose my question.
Yeah, you can pose 2 questions to Professor Soon. You can pose 2 questions to Professor Soon. Within 5 minutes time, he can respond. And after that, we can have the common discussion.
Exactly. Okay.
Please go ahead, Dr. Senaka.
Camera on. Hold on. Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Okay. My first question to Professor Soon is that you advocate a transformation to strike a balance between our mechanized existence and nature. And according to you, evolution is too slow and a revolution would be too fast and destructive. To mediate between the evolution and revolution, a transformation would reconfigure the elements of our existence. So, so this transformation would reconfigure the elements of our existence in different combinations and permutations to reconstitute the way that we live and shape our physical space. Now, in this point of human history, we also witness a transformation. Now, this transformation, it transforms the perception of our existence, our own behavior patterns, the patterns of consumption, production, etc. So in this context, what are the parallel transformations that you would prescribe for urban habitats in a post-pandemic period, which would also reflect this transformation in our thinking? Now, my next question on 3D planning, in Singapore, actually I enjoyed the 3D planning presentation. It's an exciting approach for urban design, as it overlaps different layers that accommodate vehicular movement, commercial and civic activity, office spaces, upper level urban terrace, which is topped by schools and housing, etc. Now, you also highlight the necessity for a free flow of idea between the people and the government to formulate such a paradigm shift in urban habitat design and also urban living in a broader sense. So as the French social geographer Henri Lefebvre argues that in the production of space, the nature of physical space produced by every civilization has to reflect their own values, beliefs, cultures, etc. Now, these parameters should also include political relationship between the citizen and the state when it especially comes to the production of urban space. Now, in this context, how would the future urban space get influenced by the current trends that are taking place now, such as the controlled interaction among fellow citizens, as well as the acceptance of behavior control measures, which keeps transforming the way we engage our urban physical space? So my first question is about how parallel transformations should happen to reflect our current behavior patterns, as well as current behaviors, consumptions, productions, and our perception of our own existence. And the next question is how this the post-pandemic urbanity should reflect our relationship with the state in terms of the current controls of behavior controls that we undergo and the control behaviors that we keep accepting. So with that, I will hand over the response to Professor Teken Soon, and I will stop share. Okay, it's not the screen is not shared. So Professor Soon, it's all over to you, sir. Thank you.
Am I on? Hello?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Yes, yes, I can.
On the issue of transformation, I must say straight away that statement I made was before COVID. All right. I now think we cannot afford transformation. We need revolution. Even though revolution is very destructive. Why I'm saying this? Let me go back to 1966. All right. When I met Doxiadis in Athens at the Equistics conference, and I was very dismayed by what he said. And I told him, your 5 key points about the science of human settlements is missing the most important point, and that is politics. And that point was actually referred to by our professor from India. Without politics, which is the process by which it is decided who gets what, when, and how, and for what reason. That is the driving force behind urban planning. And that is the revolutionary situation. You cannot have urban planning when you do not have land, you do not have urban land reform, or for that matter, rural land reform. China's rapid economic development, right, is only possible because of land reform, with all the tyrannies involved. All right. So this is the revolutionary price that has to be paid for progress. Okay. Now, how do I address all your other questions? I would just say straight away that most of my urban design, urban planning thinking are obsolete because the world has reached a transitional point in exactly the same manner as Gropius found in 1919 when the Bauhaus reached the transitional point in European history. And that is, after First World War, the future of Europe is industrialization. And therefore, planning and architecture must reflect the industrial ethos. What is the ethos that we need to deal with today? Robotics is going to change the world, inevitably. And it is in the context whereby the rich are too rich and the rest are not rich enough. The rest, meaning us, are not rich enough. And therefore, the economy of the world has stagnated because there is no longer any justification for investment in production, because aggregate demand, that is consumption, has declined so significantly that all our ideas about how to finance the urban infrastructure, how to provide social equity, justice in the city, and so on, Jane Jacobs, everybody, all those ideas are irrelevant. The issue is, how are you going to improve and actually construct a new supply chain? Because the existing supply chain, dominated by Anglo-American order, is collapsed. The only viable economy now is China, right? India is in the grips of total chaos because you cannot plan when your land ownership situation is totally lopsided. So this is the problem. You have a high level of democracy, right? What does democracy do? Democracy simply makes it more viable and more possible for the rich to dominate the economy of the world and the economy of cities. Therefore, cities are actually the breeding ground of capitalism. We need a new kind of capitalism. This is the kind of revolution I'm talking about. We need a stakeholder capitalism, not a shareholder capitalism. Shareholder capitalism only protects its investors. Stakeholder capitalism involves all the people as stakeholders. What is the implication of this in terms of urban planning? My PhD student from China completed a very interesting study on online urbanization. He took my ideas about rural urbanization, went to a village in South China, gave the village had only about 1,000 people. He gave the shopkeeper, the small shopkeeper, a 50-year-old shopkeeper, a laptop and taught him how to use the laptop. Within the next 2 months, this shopkeeper began to sell produce from the village to the nearest town. A pomelo, you know what's a pomelo? It's a big, like a big orange. The normal price of a pomelo in the village is 1 renminbi a piece. He was able to sell to the village, to the nearest small town, 100 kilometers away, at 10 renminbi. This immediately changed the entire economy of the village. Jack Ma came to the village, this is 4 years ago, only 4 years ago, came to the village to visit my student, and immediately learning the impact of e-commerce, right? Started 5,000 e-commerce villages, phase 1. Today, e-commerce encompasses almost the entirety of China. What is the implication of this? What is the implication of this in terms of urbanization? The big city is, in fact, the mega city has become obsolete. The implication is that of distributed, massive distributed economic production and consumption. Why? Unless we increase the earning power of people, you cannot restart the economy that is in stagnation. Therefore, the politics inevitably, the politics of the people who control the money and the power inevitably has to increase the earning power of people, without which there is no more logic, no more reason to accumulate capital. For what? The offshore accounts are already bloated, and the rich people are paying negative interest rate to the offshore accounts in Panama and all the other money laundering centers. The challenge now is how do we remobilize this idle capital to produce the revolution of capitalism itself towards market, towards stakeholder capitalism, in which against selfish self-interest, the capitalist has to increase the earning power of the masses in order that capitalism itself survives. Isn't this what Marx has actually proposed? That capitalism is its own enemy, but is its own savior. So what is the implication on urban planning, urban design, on architecture? We need to thin down the city. We do not need mega cities anymore, because the mega cities, the concentrations, the aggregation of production will be robotized. What are you going to do with 90% of the population that do not have digital skills, can never have digital skills, do not operate at the highly intellectual level? We have to increase, we have to create jobs. In a very interesting discussion by Lee Kai-fu, I urge you to look on YouTube the discussion by Mr. Lee Kai-fu, Leekaifu. Lee Kai-fu is a venture capitalist. He reports that Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, actually is financing the re-education of his workshop, of his store workers, because he knows that he has to terminate their services, because the logic of the managing the material flow in the warehouses, right, has to be robotized. So he is actually not out of the goodness of his heart, but because he wants to ensure that his workers are not going to sabotage his existing operation. Therefore, he has to give them hope for the future, right? Therefore, he's paying them money to learn new skills, right? The question is, what are the relevant new skills? The relevant new skills for the future are going to be in food production, in maybe making films, in art, in farming, in high-tech farming, organic farming, in healthcare, and so on. And as population ages, these are going to be even more important. What is the urbanization pattern? Here, methodology, planning methodology, which we have learned from Australia, from UK and America and Europe, are missing a very key methodological technique. I asked all my urban planning students and teachers and professors and those in the government service in Singapore, do you know what is the per capita floor space for housing, for workplace, for asking them data on floor space? I'm not asking them data on land space, because almost entirely the planning process is based on land use planning. That is 2D planning. We need 3D planning. Let me give you a simple calculation. In Singapore, we have no access to available data on what is the floor area per person. We know that most people live in HDB flats. 86% live in HDB flats. The average sizes range from 50 square meters to 100 square meters. And then there's a big, not a very large chunk of private housing, condominiums and bungalows and so on. So the average floor area per person, man, woman, child, and Filipino maid, or whatever maid that lives in, because everybody occupies floor space. The average floor space for housing is 25 square meters. The average floor space of all the factories in Singapore is 6 square meters. For office space, for hotels, for public amenities, shopping malls, etc., all you add them all together is another 25 square meters. So the average floor space in Singapore per person is 50 square meters. Now, if you imagine 50 square meters per person times 6 million times say 5 million population, Singapore is slightly more than 5 million, but just for easy calculation, 5 million. 5 million times 50 square meters is 250 million square meters. The whole island is 750 million square meters. In other words, if you were to plan, if you were to build every building as a one-story building and bunk them all together, they will only occupy 1/3 of the island. If you put them into 2-story things, you will occupy 1/6 of the island. If you make them 4-story, you will occupy 1/12. If 8-story, you will occupy 1/24. In other words, there is no planning problem, even at this density. So planners don't understand this at all, and because they have been trained in the wrong schools, and that is the problem. Once we understand 3D planning, that means the relationship in quantity and quality, we can then decide where we want to put what forms of buildings, and how do we stack different functions one on top of the other, so that we can reduce the footprint. Okay. What COVID has taught us is that what COVID has taught us in Hong Kong and in Singapore is that density is not a problem. Overall urban density is not a problem. The problem is the occupation, the number of people per room. That is the problem. In Singapore, we have today 0 COVID infection amongst the people here. The only infection that we have now are imported infections. We have almost totally eliminated the infections in the worker dorms. Foreign workers, we employ nearly 1 million foreign workers in Singapore, all right? But of the factory workers, they are housed in dormitories, between 12 to 20 people per room, at floor area of 4.5 square meters per person. That is why in the early days, in the early period of Singapore, the COVID infection in the worker dorms, in the foreign worker dorms, was tremendous, right? In the order of 10 to 8,000 infections per day. Today, it has been reduced almost to 0 because we are reducing the number of people per room. Hong Kong is extremely dense, even more dense than Singapore. But the poor in Hong Kong live in small little cubicles, about 5 square meters per cubicle. One person occupying 5 square meters in one cubicle. That is why the infection rate in Hong Kong is extremely low. So in other words, it's very clear. If you want to prevent future pandemics, you must improve the livelihood, the earning power of people. It's an economic issue. If we can increase the earning power of people, they will be able to afford bigger floor space. And why do they need to come to the city when they can live in the village where they came from? I did a survey in Ho Chi Minh City many years ago, where the factory workers in Ho Chi Minh City came from small towns and villages about 300 to 400 kilometers outside of Saigon. And they are living 8 people to a room, right, in 4 double-deck bunks, okay? And it's very hot, very sweaty, and the cost of living very high. So I said to them, if I were to give you a job, get you a job in your village where you came from, at the same pay or even half your pay today, what will you do? They say, I will go back immediately. Why? Because family is there, because cost of living is much lower, and I have space to move around. So there you are. The future of urbanization is actually distributed urbanization, right? If you look at you can check this out on Google Earth. If you look at traditional villages in China, let's say in the Hubei area and in the Punjab, you will find that they are all clustered about 200 to 300 families in one village cluster, surrounded by farms, surrounded by rice fields or whatever farms, okay? And these settlements are spaced about 1 to 2 kilometers apart. So it's like a checkerboard arrangement. Now, imagine if e-commerce is now available. China is developing a new satellite communication system, right? Which is faster than what Elon Musk is doing in North America, which he hopes to do around the world. But nevertheless, with digital connection, Wi-Fi connection to every small village on planet Earth, we can imagine a whole different kind of economy. And the capital for it will be mobilized from the offshore accounts, right? I am working with 10 professors in Singapore from 4 universities, as well, and in relation to 25 stakeholder representatives from politics, from business, from administration, academia, and so on, as the counterpart stakeholders of the region. And we are going to propose a whole new economy for